All right, everybody. We are now starting chapter 4. And the biggest thing, so our next exam will be over chapters 4 through 6. So we're doing carbohydrates, proteins, fat. And in particular, what I want you to focus on in these chapters are the recommendations around exercise. We've already talked about some of the nutrition basics, and we'll hit a little bit of that. And you need to know that as we get into the recommendations. But we're really going to focus on the recommendations around exercise. And I'll point this out, and I know we've had an opportunity to see it. There's a position stand. It's a little older. Well, actually, it's quite older. They haven't really come out with a new, latest, greatest position stand. So it's quite old for me, for my liking. It's like 2016, I think, or something. But it's in Blackboard. It's just a position stand. Yeah, that's ridiculous, isn't it? If they haven't come out with a new one. And unfortunately, a lot of the science doesn't change. Some of it has changed a little, but not a ton. And so, but if you wanted to read that, it gives you basically everything that we're doing in class is in this position stand. So it's just it's kind of technical to read, but it gives you all the guidelines that we're going to be talking about over the next several class periods here around carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, I think I mentioned in the announcement, I'm not sure, but this is how registered dietitians will do this, is they will make recommendations based on grams of each nutrient per kilogram of body weight. And that's where we're going to get into this. And this is where in the next exam, you will have energy expenditure calculations. You'll also have some of these calculations where you're calculating these nutrient requirements. It'll all make sense as we go through this, okay? So when you look at athletes, the truth is they don't need to eat much differently than the guidelines. If you can, because I've walked through plenty of cafeterias on college campuses and seen athletes with nothing but French fries and some ketchup on their plate. That's their lunch, right? So if you can get athletes to eat, 3 of the 5 food groups on a plate at one time, and we'll get into the meal planning later, then you're probably doing a good job. But what we know is, we've already said this several times, is that athletes need more of 2 things. They need more fluid and they need more calories. And so their energy intakes need to support training needs. And I give you this example of, say, this is a volleyball player, beach volleyball player, and let's say you do the math on this, and they need 3,000 calories. And let's say you're going to have them eat 50% carbohydrate. You do the math on that, that's 1,500 calories of carbohydrate. Everybody following me? 1,500 calories of carbohydrate. You divide that by 4, and that gives you 375 grams of carbohydrate. Everybody see how I got that? Now, in a face-to-face class, what I would do is I'd be writing this on the board so you can see it, but you can't see it here. But everybody okay with the fact that, hey, 50% of 1,000, or sorry, 3,000 is 1,500. You divide that by 4, that gives you 375 grams of carbohydrate. And let's say this beach volleyball player is 110 pounds. You divide 110 by 2.2 to go from pounds to kilograms. And then you divide that in kilograms. Somebody could do that for me real quick. 110 divided by 2.2. That way we can, I don't have a phone or a calculator or anything in front of me. Somebody do that math real quick. 110 divided by 2.2. Help me out. Whatever that is, and I'm waiting because nobody else has a calculator either. 50. Vince says 50. So you divide that by 375 and you get 7.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And what you're going to see is that's pretty high, right? You could go higher, but that's quite a bit. So the point is, if you're going to feed this person 3,000 calories and 50% of it's coming from carbohydrate, and you do the math on this, and that works out to 7.5 grams per kg per kilogram of body weight, they better be training. Because if you're not training, what's going to happen? Somebody in the chat, what's going to happen if you are eating 3,000 calories and you're not training? You're going to get, yeah, you're going to get fat. Thank you, Tucker. That's exactly right. You're going to get fat. So that's my point of this. As we get started, is they're going to gain weight. And so you don't want them doing that. Or what they may do is they may come back to you and be like, I can't eat this 3,000 calories. This is way too much food, right? So, and that's what we do is we're doing these energy expenditure calculations and doing all the math. The math is great, but really it's about having your athletes eat what you recommended and see how they do, right? Because they may come back and it may be not working for them, right? But they need to be training if you're going to give them that much food. Now, because we're focused on carbohydrate, we know that the whole goal of carbohydrate is to provide the body with energy. And we know that carbohydrate is going to be key to fueling exercising muscle, right? You're going to use carbohydrate, and I can't remember, I'm guessing it probably was on the test, that carbohydrate's the only nutrient that can be broken down anaerobically, right? But it also can be used aerobically as well. With your fat and protein, the only way you can use that is if you're actually exercising aerobically, which most of our strength and power sports aren't. So you're going to be using, in most cases, glycogen that's stored in your muscle in the liver. And remember the recommendation, which you probably saw on the first test, you're probably going to see it on the other two tests too. You just need to know that 45 to 65% of total calories. And you know the foods that have carbohydrate in them, pretty much all the foods. Anywhere from donuts, convenience foods, to your breads and pastas and oatmeals, it all contains carbs. But those are important because if you got your athletes that are exercising a lot, they can get away with eating more carbohydrate. And so this is the recommendation. Write this down, put it into memory, that the recommended amount of carbohydrate, and I think this was even, I don't know why they did this, but I think they even put this in chapter 1 of your text, but it's 3 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So when you saw on the last slide or so, it said 7.5, that's pretty high. It's typical though for a strength and power athlete, to be honest. But if they're training like most athletes should be, right? Depends on the time of the year, the season. They're in the off season, they're in the preseason, they're in season. But in general, the range is all the way from 3 to 12. Now, you're going to see when we get to protein and fat that the ranges aren't even near what this is, because of the 3 nutrients, this is the one that can be manipulated the most and should be based on how much activity the athlete's doing. And so just know, and I think I've got this coming up, is that if you're trying to lose weight and you're not active, then you need to be closer to the 3 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. And if you're like Lance Armstrong, you need to be closer to the 12, right? When you're training and competing and getting ready for the Tour de France. So there's a range. Okay. And it's up to us. This is where there's an art and a science to this. We're talking you through the science, but there's an art to figuring out, okay, what's going to work for my athlete. So it looks kind of like this. Based on how much training you do, this is where you can really bump it up. So it looks something like this. If you're in a sport that's, you exercise an hour intensely a couple of days a week, then you might get away with 7 grams of carbohydrate. If it's really low, I might suggest 3, 4, 5 grams up to 6. And again, this is just a guideline. There's some more in your book. I don't know what page. I don't have the book in front of me. And then as the duration increases, then you can get away with doing more, right? And it happens a little bit inherently because the more you train and exercise, the hungrier you tend to get, the more you want to eat. So a lot of times it happens inherently. But just know that, hey, you can get away with doing more carbohydrate. if you're exercising like this weekend, we're gonna do a 20-mile run. And probably on Wednesday of next week, probably do a 100-mile bike. This is our last big training block. But so on those days, and here's the thing, right? I may not be eating 10 grams every single day. It's based on, because my training is going to change from day to day. Today, I'm going to go out and run 8 miles, which will take me about hour and 20 minutes, something like that, depending on how I'm feeling. But, maybe I need to be eating closer to 7 today. But on a day when I'm biking 100 miles, I could be closer to 9 to 10. So just know that there's a difference based on what you're training. This is from your textbook. I don't know what page it's on, but here's what I want to point out. Most of your strength and power sports are going to be somewhere between 5 to 7 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. If you look at 5 to 7, this is most of our there's track sprints, here's weightlifting, here's swimming. These are more sprint related. Cycling, short distance, like we haven't really gotten to. We probably should have done this. I don't know if I did this in our videos around. There's different cyclists. There's like the Tour de France cyclists, but then there's track cyclists. I don't know that I've showed you that. There might have been a video from chapter 3, but short distances, mountain biking, most of your strength and power sports are going to be along here. Okay, 5 to 7. And then as you get into some of these events, like they're saying wrestling, again, this is kind of a crossover, 5 to 8. I would still probably say like 5 to 7 would work with these folks. And then as you get into more running events like cross country, where you're doing a 10K and some of this other, that's when you ramp up to 6 to 8. And I'm surprised in some of this list that they didn't even put like football, baseball, basketball. I'm not sure why they didn't do that, but 5 to 7 usually gets the job done when you're looking at strength and power sports. And then as you ramp up with like more aerobic things where you're actually doing work, whether you're running like this is a 10K or more, then yeah, you can get away with 6 to 8 and then on up based on how much you're doing. And here's an example of how this works. Let's say we've got a 150-pound female and she's doing a spin class, but she's just doing it 3 days a week, right? You go to your gym, you do spin class 3 days a week. You do the math, and I can't remember if I used 4 grams or 6 grams or maybe in the middle and did 5 grams, but you take 150 pounds, and you can do this with me, 150 pounds divided by 2.2, that gets her body weight in kilograms. And then you just multiply that. I can't remember if I multiplied it by 4, by 5, by 6, but it should come up to about 300 grams per day. Everybody following how I'm getting that? If you don't, type in the chat, say, no, I'm not following this. I could actually pull up like a Word document or something and kind of do the math on that. But here's the steps. You take 150 pounds, you divide it by 2.2. Type in the chat, somebody, what did you get if you take 150 pounds and divide it by 2.2? And this is my fault because I should have told you, and I don't know if I did at the beginning of the semester, or maybe I did. From here on out, it would be a good idea to bring a calculator. Okay, so 68. Okay, so you got 68 kilograms. 68 times 4, let's say, is what? Somebody do that. 68 times 4. Yeah, 272. Okay. And I think maybe if you went 6, it might be closer to 300. I can't remember what number I used. Everybody seeing how I'm getting that? 300 grams. 300 grams of carbohydrate. And think about this. How many calories of carbohydrate is that, somebody? This is where test questions come in. This is where this would be easy. So 300 grams of carbohydrate is how many calories of carbohydrate? somebody? Yeah, 1,200. Okay, so think about that. We usually base, like when you look at a nutrition facts panel, we base everything on how many calories, somebody? Like when you look at the nutrition facts panel, I'll type it in for you, 2,000. So if you take 1,200 by 2,000, what percentage is that? It should be somewhere around 50 to 60. Well, you know, it's not more, a little more than 50. So the 60, let's just say it is. I don't know. I don't have my calculator. 60%? Is that right? That's or close to it. That's within the guidelines. Okay. That's within the guidelines. Yeah, 60% even. Okay. Good guess. I know I just knew it's a little more than 50. But everybody's seeing how we do this. This is how dietitians usually do it. Sports dietitians, dietitians in general will prescribe these macronutrients based on grams per kilogram of body weight. And so the opposite is the case if you're not opposite, but on the other end of the spectrum is like you got your Lance Armstrong. He weighs 150 pounds as well. But if you do the math for him and he's training, he's going out for a 100-mile bike ride, and usually they go out for more than 100 miles. It could be 120, 130, seriously. But they're riding like twice as fast as I would. But if you do the same thing and you take that 68 kilograms, that's what y'all said, right? This is 68 kg times 10, you know, you end up getting about 800 grams of carbohydrate. Holy moly, right? I can't tell if it's, yeah, so what would that be? 68 times 10 is 680. It must have done the 12. You can do that, but point is to see how this works. So 800 grams times 4, that's 3,200 calories. But interesting thing is, remember, if you remember a slide in the energy expenditure chapter, we said the Tour de France cyclists, they showed them, burning up like 7,000 calories a day. So if you go 3,200 divided by 7,000, then you can see the numbers are way bigger because this cyclist, Lance Armstrong, is, training for the Tour de France. I don't know what percentage that is, but it's right at about 50%, isn't it? Everybody's seeing how that works. All right. And just know, I don't know if I want to show you this just yet. You can go back and forth with this. Like we're going forward, like we know the weight and we know how many grams. You could go backwards and say, okay, this athlete, Lance Armstrong, is consuming 3,200 calories from carbohydrate. Right? So you can work backwards. He's consuming 3,200 calories from carbs. He's 68 kilograms. How many grams per kg is he eating of carbs is he eating? Does that make sense? So if you know they're consuming 3,200, you just divide that by 4, right? And that gives you, well, we've got it on the slide. Let's say that gives you 800 grams. And then you just divide by, right, 800 grams divided by 68. And that should give you your grams per kg, which I don't know what that is. Everybody's seeing how you can go backwards and forwards with this. All right. Just want to make sure we're all good. I don't see anybody in the waiting room. Okay, just in case. Oh, yeah, I do. Oh, hold up. They didn't pop up for some reason. Maybe I should make somebody a co-host next time, um, so that they can watch when people come in. I didn't see that. Sorry for those who I just let you in. I don't know how long, if you were here and got dropped or all right. Everybody okay with this? Just seeing that you can go forwards and backwards with this as long as you got the numbers. All right. And one of the things, and this is just showing you, I don't know what page this is on your text, but just showing you how a lot of times using percents, like we were talking about, like I want you to eat 60% carbohydrate. That really is not a great way to do it, because depending on the athlete and the size of the athlete, 70% could be a whole heck of a lot versus someone who's bigger, 70%, not that much. And so this is just showing you, depending on, like Liza over here is only eating 1,400 calories versus Jennifer eating 2,000 calories. They're both eating 70%. But what you're seeing is that one's eating 4.5 grams per kg and one's eating 6.5 grams per kg. So this is usually the easiest way to do it. They're 70%, and again, that's above recommended. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that much, even for these athletes. They better be, and you can see that it's 4.5 for Liza and 6 for Jennifer. And that's the reason it's easier just to do it by just go straight to grams per kg than doing percentages. Okay. All right. Don't freak out, but don't like to do math. In your book, I just wanted to show you this. It gives you the ranges based on, all the way from 5 all the way up to 10 grams per carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. And then it gives you your weight, and it tells you if you go across, like for me, I'm probably right about here now. And if I'm going to eat, let's say, I don't know, 7 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, then that's about 500 grams of carbohydrate. Everybody following? This is just a table, so you don't have to do all that math. It gives you the grams of carbs per kg. You look at your weight, and it does the math for you. Although I definitely want you to feel comfortable doing the math. Okay. So I just wanted to do that as an introduction on where we're going with this. Remember, you've got a range from 3, which is if you're, trying to lose weight, you probably will be at the 3 grams per kg amount. And then on the high end is if you're training a lot, 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram body weight is a lot. And as a matter of fact, before we move forward, do this for me on a blank sheet of paper. Type, and I used to do this as an assignment, but since it's online, I can't do that. On a blank sheet of paper, type in, just write in your weight in pounds, convert it to kilograms, and then underneath that, so type in write in your weight in pounds, then convert to kilograms for me. Let's see. Okay, weight in pounds, convert to kilograms, and then multiply by the multiply by the range, multiply by 3, and by, let's just do 10. And see what you get. This will show you the difference in grams of carbohydrate. So somebody, when you get that, just type it in the chat, the two numbers, the range, and see what you get. I'll give you a second to do that. Just so you see the difference between the low end and the high end. Yeah, so you're either eating 247 grams, which is still quite a bit, right? That's 800 calories of carbohydrate, or you're eating like 3,000. That's a lot of carbohydrate. Oh my gosh, you would have to be exercising a lot to need that much carbohydrate. Maybe you're hiking for 24 hours or something. I don't know. That's a lot of calories. And that's just the carbohydrate. That's not factoring in protein. That's not factoring in fat. Right? So just know that that's a lot of carbohydrate. Okay. I just wanted to walk you through that. And like I said, in class, I just have you do this so you do the math and I can see you do the math. And for people that are struggling, because I know at least got 3 or 4 or 5 of you putting the numbers in. If you are struggling with the math part, always reach out. I mean, we can do a quick Zoom or something and I can help you out. And there's going to be assignments coming up that will force you to do this math. And so just be okay with that for right now. If you're a little nervous, we can chat, but all right. The next section then looks at how do carbohydrates improve performance. We know that carbohydrates are going to be important for anaerobic exercise and for aerobic exercise, right? And this is where we talk about our pastas and our pancakes and waffles, right? And just tell me in the chat, because this is like important stuff. Are you everybody watching? Pay attention. Type in the chat. Do you like pancakes or do you like waffles? Don't lie. You got to pick a side. Pancakes or waffles? Hannah says pancakes. Waffles. Ella says pancake or waffles. Okay, waffles. Good. Okay. Yeah, I just had to wake you up. Make sure you're still with me. Waffles. You know, because what's the difference between a pancake and a waffle? My wife's standing over here and she knows the texture. Eggs. Okay.
Waffles have abs.
Oh, yes. Waffles are pancakes with abs. Get that? Get that joke? All right, that's pretty bad. Pancakes with abs, right? You got some ripples. You got, looks like me right now. No, not really. All right. Just know I like both. I'll be honest. All right. Depending on if I'm eating like Eggos or I can just heat them up in the toaster, I got to make some pancakes. All right. So this is how this works. We've already talked about this a little bit in that we know we've got carbohydrate that's stored in the muscle and the liver primarily. And we know that we got more of it stored in the muscle than the liver. So let's just say we've got, in general, it depends on how big you are. And this is, I've got at the bottom, I think I may have pulled this information from this slide from an exercise physiology textbook based on about 150-pound man, 12% body fat. So it's pretty low body fat, but around 150 pounds, you have about 2,000 to 2,500 calories of stored carbohydrate. You store it in the muscle mainly. Majority of it, as you can see, anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000. You got some in the liver, 300 to 400 grams. It depends. It can vary. But then you also have glucose, right? You got some carbohydrate. You wouldn't really want to call it storage, but it's in your bloodstream. Everybody following that? When you compare this to fat, well, there's no real comparison in that when you look at energy stored as fat in the adipose tissue from someone who only has 12% body fat, you got 70,000 calories of stored energy as fat. And then within the muscle, you even have about 1,500 calories. You know, because you ever had like meat, like you're eating your steak and you see the fat that's marbled in the meat. That's in human, we got fat stored in our muscle too that we could use. Problem is, and this is the whole scenario I'm trying to set up for you around exercise, is that when we look at carbohydrate, and you look at the slide on this, carbohydrate is stored really where we need it. Most of it is stored in the muscle, right? But when you look at how much we have stored, that's limited. Now, with fat, it's just the opposite. With fat, you got almost unlimited calories. But the problem is most of it's stored in the adipose tissue in your fat cells. And getting that fat out of the fat cell and through the bloodstream and to the muscle and then metabolizing it doesn't happen in seconds, right? It doesn't happen. That's the reason when we talk about working aerobically, it's going to take several minutes for that to really kick in, and then to burn fat maximally. I mean, you're talking later. It's not going to happen within those first few seconds or the first few minutes. Okay. So that's the challenge you run into, is that carbohydrate is stored where you need it. You just don't have as much of it. And fat, on the other hand, you've got plenty of it, but it's not stored. It's not easily accessible. Okay. Everybody okay with this? And oh, by the way, let me point out one more thing. With the carbohydrate, how much we store. Anybody know someone who's done a marathon, or you know much about marathons? When you hear people talking about hitting the wall and bonking and, hitting the wall in a marathon, what mile marker do they usually hit the wall at? Anybody? Take a shot. There's 26 miles in a marathon. So what mile marker do you think they nailed it? Hannah nailed it. About 20 miles. And we know this, right? How many calories do you burn per mile? I think we've already talked about this. Usually when you walk or run, how many calories per mile when you walk or run? Somebody? Have we talked about this? Huh. Maybe we haven't. We should have. Usually it's about 100 calories a mile. No, it's about 100 calories. And if you're bigger, you're going to burn a little more. If you're smaller, you're going to burn a little less. So then usually when you're at anywhere between mile 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, this is where you often see people hitting the wall because they're running out of energy. They're running out of stored carbohydrate. Everybody following me here? And so this is the challenge that you come up, if you're doing a weight training session, not a problem. I mean, you're going to be using some muscle glycogen, but you're not going to get to a point where you're going to deplete your muscle glycogen. But if you're doing a long distance event, that becomes a challenge in fueling so that you don't run out of energy. And usually what happens with aerobic stuff is, and see, with anaerobic stuff, you never really get into burning fat during the exercise. But with aerobic stuff, you got to have a little bit of carbohydrate burning, which allows you to also burn the fat. It's kind of like camping. Anybody been camping and try to start a fire? Anybody good at that? It's trying to start a fire when you're camping. You basically, when you're doing that, you don't get the big logs and start the fire. You get little small kindling, little small sticks and grass and whatever you do, right? And you light the kindling wood, the little small pieces, and that ends up lighting the big pieces, which is the logs. And in this case, you have the carbohydrate. You have a little bit burning, and that also allows you to burn the fat together. Okay? And you really kind of have to have some carbohydrate burning to optimally burn the fat. All right. So this is what it looks like. And these numbers probably won't match up because I created this slide quite a few moons ago. But bottom line is you got most of your carbohydrates stored in your muscle. You got some glucose in the blood. And actually, that's probably even less than this. It's probably more like 5 grams. You might be surprised. I think it's like a teaspoon or so of sugar if I were to put it into a quantity here of glucose that you have floating around in your blood. and then you've got, let's say, 150 grams in the liver. Now, what ends up happening is you start to exercise, you're going to use the muscle glycogen first, and it's going to start to be depleted first. And what ends up happening then as it becomes depleted is we start pulling glucose from the blood. But we've got to have enough blood glucose, right? We have to supply that. So what ends up happening is the liver has to help out. So the liver becomes depleted. And so when you run out of liver glycogen, everybody follow me? When you run out of liver glycogen, that's when you bonk and hit the wall. When people talk about that, that's what they mean. They run out of glycogen. In particular, you're going to run out of liver glycogen. And so write this down, that, glycogen stored in the liver glycogen is the final storage depot, okay, for carbohydrate. When you run out of liver glycogen, because that means it's already really low in your muscle. And we're needing it, but we don't have any of it, okay? And that can happen in a couple of different ways. One is pacing when you're running. I've done this. Oh my gosh. Many marathons ago, I was as fit as I've ever been, and I knew I was ready to have a really great performance, a PR performance. And it was a Memphis marathon, and my goal was like 3:15. And so as we started the marathon, I did the first half, and they have these people running with signs, the pacers is what they're called, and they run with signs, and you just kind of follow them along, right? But instead of following the 3:15 group from the start, I jumped in, and by halfway I was running with the 3:05 group, running way too fast. And I didn't think about it, I should know this, that because I ran faster than I usually do in training, I was burning through my glycogen faster as well. So by the time I got halfway, 13.1, I was with the 3:05 group. By the time I was at like mile 17, I was with the 3:10 group. By the time I got to mile 20, I was falling back to the 3:20 group. And then I finished in 3:30, but I was just feeling so good and went out too hard. So I used my glycogen stores too quickly, and I was struggling to the finish line. And that was due to pacing. But what do we tend to do, and this, to help support this problem? What do we do? Like, if anybody who's done a long race or seen races like marathons, even Ironmans, even in cycling events, they'll have these. What do they call them, somebody? And what do you do to prevent this bonking or hitting the wall? Type in the chat if you know. Anybody? What do you do? Carb loading. Okay, so that's what you do at the beginning to make sure your glycogen stores are full. But as you start to exercise, they snack right. Zinger waffles and energy chews. Okay, so what do you? And let's keep it even simpler than that, Hannah. What's the first thing you think of when you think of sports and performance, and what do athletes do? And this is not just for endurance athletes, but also strength and power athletes too, on the sidelines. What are they doing? Oh, am I going to give it? This. Energy drinks. Okay, not necessarily. What kind of energy drinks, Gabby? This is where it's hard to do over Zoom. Oh, they hydrate. Okay, so combine the drinks and the Yes, thank you, Cameron. Yes, Gatorade. Anybody know? Type in the chat if you know or knew that Gatorade came from the Florida Gators football team. The history. Okay, a few of you did. Some of you may be, what? Anybody like, I'd never heard that before. Yeah, it's come from the Florida Gators. The team, it was back, what, in the 60s, probably 70s? the football team was practicing out in the heat, in the Florida heat, right, and humidity, and they were running out of energy and they were cramping. And so the scientists at Florida University put together a drink that had three things. It had the fluid that you needed for hydration. It had the calories and simple carbohydrates that you needed for energy. And then it had the electrolytes. And it obviously blew up. If you didn't know that it started with the Florida Gator football team. And now it's like this multi-billion-dollar industry of sports drinks. And so the way this works is as you take these, and what anybody remember or know what they're called as you're running a marathon or the stops? What do they call them? Anybody know? They probably got this name from the product as well. They call them aid stations. I never thought about that till just now. A lot of times they'll call them aid stations, where you have a stop and they've got, like an Ironman that we do, they'll have they'll have volunteers come out and they'll have sports drinks, they'll have water, they'll have some of these energy gels. They've got everything from pretzels, and depends on what event you're doing. But they have aid stations that will provide you with food and energy products. But the way this works, listen to this. So as you're exercising, we said your muscle glycogen becomes depleted first. What you do is at these stations, right, you take Gatorade, let's say, and it's in simple sugar form, right? It's simple sugar. It requires little, if any, digestion. It goes straight to your bloodstream. And once it's in your bloodstream, it goes to your muscle. And what does that do? That conserves liver glycogen. So going back to what I said before, that this liver is kind of the final storage depot, your goal in sports is to conserve that liver glycogen. And strength and power sports is not a big deal. When you see athletes on the sideline, what are they doing? They're drinking, they're eating, there's time to do that. But in endurance sports, you got to do it on the fly, which makes it way more challenging. And I've got Gatorade here, but any of these products will work. Anybody like Powerade? I actually prefer Powerade. Or what we do is Country Time lemonade. Like we'll just go to the store and buy some lemonade and mix it into our bottles. It's the same thing. It's simple sugar. Okay, so it doesn't have to be Gatorade. It could be Powerade. It could be Country Time lemonade. I've got a goddaughter who she's a dietitian. This may inspire some of you. Pedialyte selling stuff now. Yes, they are. My goddaughter started her own. I'll just put it in here, not as a promo, but was it flowformulas.com? Because she had trouble with Gatorade and some of these other traditional sports drinks. And so she created this allergen free, no corn, no additives. Yeah. So she's doing pretty well now, making this sports drink. She's living in Colorado, and pretty cool stuff. She's really targeting more cyclists, and even like for some reason the vegans and vegetarians are flocking more to this thing than most. But anyway, it's kind of neat. But that's how this whole thing works. Yes, you could do gels and you could do all these other products, but the fluid is going to, because if you are taking some of these goos and gels and all, you're going to have to take some fluid with it. So just know that. But that's how this works. That's how carbohydrate improves performance. And you hear a lot about fasting and fasted workouts and all, and you can do that. Like it's experience though. Like I'm getting ready to go for an 8-mile run. I'm drinking my coffee this morning. I may have had a little bite of muffin earlier, but I'm pretty much going to just run 8 miles without taking a bottle or anything like that, just because I've been doing this for a while and I won't need it for 8 miles. If I were going 10 or 12 or 15, or like this weekend, I'm going to run 20, then yeah, I would take a bottle. I would take something with some fluid, and I would plan out where I would probably have some gel, take some gels too. But just know that's how you do this to conserve that glycogen. All right, everybody, and understanding carbohydrates and how this sports drink works, and these other products too. And we'll get into that as we look at the training diet. So let's start with before exercise. And someone mentioned this earlier about glycogen loading. Sometimes it's called carb loading. Sometimes in your book, like the sciencey folks would want to call it like carbo loading, or glycogen supercompensation is a fancy word for it too. But this is not a new idea. This has been around as well, like in the 60s. It's our philosophies around this has changed. Now, the whole goal of glycogen loading is mainly for strength and power, or sorry, mainly for endurance sports. Strength and power, you can focus on a little bit if you want to, but it doesn't have to be it's not as hard, because you're not you have timeouts and half times and all these things where you can fuel and replenish. But with endurance sports, it's pretty critical that you focus on at least having optimal carbohydrates at the start, especially if it's like a marathon or one of these other longer endurance. If you're doing a 5K, you don't have to carb load for a 5K or even a 10K. It's not really till you get to like the half marathon distance and beyond, I would say, okay, let's think about making sure you carb load. And the way they used to do this is they would take you out, and this is what you can probably read in your book. I don't know what page it's on, but where they would take you out and they would run you to fatigue. Seriously, you would train to fatigue. So you would totally deplete your glycogen stores. And in the days leading up to the event, you would just load those back in. We know that you don't have to do that anymore. And so what ends up happening now is, like in that last week, or even like when I'm training for Ironman the last couple of weeks, we call that taper, where you're tapering off your training. The volume is decreasing. The intensity is still maintained, but you're decreasing your volume. And so, and as you get closer in those last week, you are reducing intensity as well. But point is, in the last week, as you're starting the week, you're probably going to eat kind of normal. It depends on what your diet looks like going into it. If you're eating ample carbohydrate, you might not have to change much of anything. But for those of you who are like, okay, I just want to make sure I've got carbohydrate, and that's the whole goal, right? Is to, when you get to your competition, to have your glycogen stores full. You know, this is the oldest meal timing strategy. Like I said, it's been around a really long time. Eat a normal mixed diet with ample carbohydrates, and then as you really get into the last several days, then you can, because what happens in the last several days of a marathon training or Ironman training, you're really only running or exercising 15 to 30 minutes, or maybe you're taking a day off. Everybody's different. Like for me, I like to take when I'm 2 days from an event, I like to take a day off. And then on the day before, I like to do a little something. Some people will take the day before off. It just depends. But you're reducing your training and the intensity. And so just by eating a little more carbohydrate, that's going to maximize those glycogen stores. That's going to keep them full. I used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. I've been doing this a really long time. I used to put like energy bars next to my bed, and I would, because they talk about, okay, you're losing glycogen with your overnight fast, when you're sleeping. I used to put an energy bar over, and even maybe some sports drink over on the bedstand, and set my alarm for like 1 or 2 in the morning. And I would reach over and half asleep and grab the bar and shove it down and eat it and drink whatever. And that usually just got me up to pee later. But the point is, you don't need to do that anymore. Okay, you may lose a little glycogen, but you're going to replete that when you get up in the morning and have your breakfast. So just increase the carbs slightly. 50 grams is enough. I mean, because 50 grams is what? That's like 200 calories. And if it's a carbohydrate, that's just pay a little more attention than you would normally. And you may feel a little heavy because with the carbohydrate, it's going to also hold on to water. So you may feel a little heavy in those last couple of days. Sometimes you may gain a pound or two just in water weight. But once you get out there and you're exercising for 3, 4, 8 hours, you're glad you have those carbs on board. What you don't want to do is something I did a talk at a running club, and there was an ultra runner there, and she admitted to me that in the last week of her training, before the race, she gained like 7 pounds. That's not good. 7 pounds in 7 days, because she was still eating as if she was training like, 50, 60, 70 miles, like she was running 50, 60, 70 miles a week. You can't do that. You just want to back off on the calories a little bit in that last week or so, but just make sure you're taking in plenty of carbohydrate. You don't want to overeat. You don't want to be gaining. If you gain a pound or two, that's kind of normal, just because if you're eating a little more carbohydrate, you're going to gain that water weight, but you just don't want to overeat. So, is glycogen loading needed? There's even some studies now that show you can maximize your glycogen stores in less than 24 hours, but you do it by higher amount of carbohydrate. It's in the book, they probably mention like 10 grams per kg or something. So you can do and use the slower, more moderate approach, which is what I usually do, and just kind of concentrate on having a little bit more carbohydrate going into your event. Or you could, the last 24 hours, eat really high carbohydrate, like 10 grams per kg or something, and that would maximize it too. But here's the deal with the carbohydrate loading. It's not this end all be all. It doesn't always translate to improved performance, because there's so many other factors that affect your performance. Your training, if you get injured and you can't train like you normally would, that's going to affect your performance. Other things that might affect your performance that you don't even think about are, let's just be honest, mental toughness. Sometimes I get into these events and I do better in some of these events because I'm tougher, just mentally tougher. I've been doing this for a really long time. You get some of these folks that, they just end up walking the marathon, and the Ironman, versus toughing it out. And there's some grit that you have to have. So just because you carb load doesn't always translate into improved performance. You could have a day where I've done this, where it's like super hot and super windy. The conditions will affect your performance. So there's a lot of it that's out of your control. You just do the best you can, because performance is, there's a lot of factors involved. And this is where, I mentioned this, you don't need to load for anything. And I guess I should have started with, when do you really need to focus on, in an event where carbohydrates are going to be depleted, right? When do you need to focus? So if your event, and this is an endurance event, is anywhere like, I consider a long run anything over about an hour and a half. So if you're exercising continuously for an hour and a half, or more, then that's when you need to think about, okay, I'm going to focus on taking carbohydrates in during my exercise, and then also loading up before I start, so I'm ready to go. You don't need to do it for a 5K. There's no reason to carb load for a 5K. I see this a lot. We used to have in Conway a program called Women Run Arkansas. I don't know if you've heard of it, where you'd have all these different running clinics. It's to get women started running in clinics around the state. And then it'd all come to Conway to run a 5K as a celebration. And every year they would have this big pasta party for a 5K. And I would see women after the race, how'd your race go? And they were like, oh, it didn't go so well. I was so bloated and full. I overate at the pasta party, and I just didn't perform well. So there's no reason to do this. All right. So that's carb loading or glycogen loading. Okay. You can do it if your event, is going to be a longer event. You can think about just eating ample carbohydrate if you're strength and power sport. I mean, you don't want to ignore it, but it's not as critical as it would be if you were, an endurance athlete. It's still important, but all right. So we're going to go through the next section and then we'll call it. These are important as well. These are pre-exercise meal guidelines. Here's just a question before we jump into this. What do you eat? Do you eat before you go train? Because I know a lot of you are exercisers. Do you eat before you train? And then how long before you train do you eat? Like if you're going to weight train or you're going for a run, do you eat before that run? What do you think? Tell me. Type in the chat what you do. There's no judgment for me. So, yeah. I could never eat before. Okay. Yeah. So you have all kinds of types of athletes. Some athletes would be like, food doesn't sit well on my stomach before I exercise. And Hannah's saying she didn't really necessarily eat before. And so what I would ask you, what sport is that? And were you in high school? A lot of you probably were high school athletes. And you can high carb meal about an hour before lifting. Okay. Yes. Okay. So high school athlete. A lot of people can. And so as long as you've eaten something, like depending on when your competition is, if you've eaten, several hours before, that's the thing. You got to figure this out. I'm sure you had something. It was just way earlier to allow for it to digest. And if like you can get away with eating closer if you're doing some type of potential like lifting weights. It depends on the activity, right? If I'm going out for a run, I can't, if I do eat before I run, it has to be a couple hours. To give you an example, when we do these Ironman events, they usually start around 7 a.m. I'll get up at about 4 a.m. and have my breakfast. And we'll talk about that later, but it really depends on what your activity is, because with lifting, there's not a whole lot of jostling going around. So you could probably eat closer to that exercise bout. You could probably even eat a little more if you wanted to, closer to the exercise bout than if I was going to run. I just can't. And I know that running is probably the most difficult. I could probably eat more on the bike than I can on the run or before the run. Okay. I could have a normal meal usually, but I'd still need some time to digest. So here are the guidelines. You do want a high carb meal or snack that's low in fat, low in fiber. So these are two separate. And in class, if it's a face-to-face class, I would have a quiz at some point, and I would have you list 3 or 4 of these on a quiz. These are important. So you want it, before your exercise, you need a high carbohydrate meal. And why do we say carbohydrates? These carbohydrates are going to provide you energy depending on how long you're going, but they're easy to digest. That's the important piece. You don't necessarily want to go eat some oatmeal right before you go for your run, but you might be able to eat, something. Usually the higher glycemic index foods that are easier to digest are the ones we tend to think of them as convenience foods. Like before exercise, I will have some waffles or pancakes because that's pretty easy. Okay. And it depends on if you're just going for a short run, you could have a little snack. I usually don't. depending on how long I run. Like I'm going for an 8 mile run. I really haven't had a ton of food at all this morning. I've had some coffee, so I've had some calories. So high in carbs, low in here. Let's focus on this part. Low in fat, low in fiber. Why low in fat? Somebody? Anybody know? Why would you want, if you're eating your pre-exercise meal, why would you want to eat something that's low in fat? What do you think? Crickets. That's okay. What does fat have to do with it? Anybody? Well, it has to do with digestion. Um, Lower in fat allows for easier digestion. If you eat a lot of fat, it's going to slow your digestion. Some of you, especially with around exercise, fat doesn't go well, and so it may give you some GI distress later on, and it just slows the absorption of those carbohydrates. Everybody following me on that? And so what about fiber? Why would you want a low fiber meal or snack? Anybody? What does it have to do with? Anybody? Okay. Yeah, same thing, digestion. Okay, so yeah, so you could seriously have some GI problems. Yeah, going to the bathroom, that's another one, Hannah. Yes, it may cause you some, and it may cause a gas attack. Like these two guys, what if they gave these two guys, these sprinters, high fiber bar before they ran? They might be like gas propelled down the track. But it's a lot of things, right? And this is where when we talk about nutrition and personalizing this nutrition in and around exercise is a key place to do that, because I can usually tolerate more fiber on my daily meals than most people, but I won't do it in and around exercise digestion, just like the fat, and then you upset, and there's just, for me, no reason to take that risk. So these are really kind of three separate guidelines. You want a high carbohydrate meal or snack. You want that's or snack that's low in fat. You want a meal that or snack that's low in fiber. And when do you want to take this in? About 2 to 4 hours before exercise. And it depends on, and this is if it's a bigger meal, you're going to eat it, like I said, with Ironman, we'll get up at 4 in the morning and eat, so we have time to let that food digest. Hopefully some of that's going to be converted to glycogen, and we're going to get to the bathroom. That's the most important thing for me, is getting to the bathroom. So 2 to 4 hours to let that digest, and we'll come back around to this, but 2 to 4 hours. And this is the whole point of this too, is that the meal size and the timing of that meal is interrelated. In other words, I can eat more calories, and I know exactly, I usually eat about 700 calories at 4 a.m. On Ironman day. Or even if it's a marathon, I won't eat 700 calories. It may be closer to 500 or 400. Okay. So the further you are out, which makes sense, the more calories you can eat. And as you get closer to the event, the less calories. And the more, it really should be focused more on the carbohydrate for sure. And, and how much should this meal be? It depends on the size of the person. The meal or snack could be anywhere from 200 calories all the way up to 1,000 calories, depending on how big you are. Like I said, I'm consuming around 700, and that's way, 3-4 hours before the event. And I know what I'm doing. I'm doing waffles with some pancakes, waffles with some peanut butter, maybe a little bit of fruit on there, some syrup, and I'm keeping it pretty simple. If you want to have some protein, you could do that, but just know, back when I was in high school, this was many moons ago, right? we would have our football games, and the coach, for some unknown reason, would have us all meet. We would go to we call it the Grecian Steakhouse. Grecian, they probably don't have those anymore. Grecian Steakhouse, and we would have a big meal, just a protein meal, just a steak with a baked potato, and then the problem is that big protein meal wouldn't digest before we played the game. And so it was not good. We call these I call them old school training table, where you sit around, you're eating your big protein, your steak. Don't do that anymore. I think coaches are smarter than that now. And they've learned that, hey, you want to keep this simple and easy and light and easy to digest, and not these big buffet meals. And then, yes, you can have some protein. Lean is better, but I have the peanut butter, which has a little protein in it. The thing is, it's going to keep you full, which is what you want to do. You worst thing in being an athlete, being out exercising, is if you're hungry. So you need to eat enough to where, okay, you're not out in the middle of your exercise bout and you're like, oh man, I am hungry. I need something to eat, right? That's usually not a good sign. So having a little protein and little, if any, fat, that's why protein would be a better option here. And you don't have to overcomplicate it. Here's an example, like a banana. You got to know what you can tolerate. Banana, a cup of low-fat yogurt, pretzels is an example of that. I just know personally I can't do dairy before I exercise, which is another thing. You may have found that out for yourself. Here's it's more of a meal here: bagel with turkey and veggies, a Rice Krispie treat. These are the types of simple sugars and simple carbohydrates that you can have in and around exercise. I wouldn't recommend eating them, 24/7, but having a Rice Krispie treat or having a Pop-Tart. We're going to get into some of this when we talk about during exercise in the next class, but some of the things that we might not call them food, snack food maybe, but they're okay in and around exercise. 2 cups of skim milk. And then, skim milk, milk I'm not doing before, but again, that's an option for you maybe. And then as you get closer, it may be something as simple as just one banana or sports drink or an energy bar. And just know that the closer you are to your event, the less you're going to be able to eat. Okay. And this is where you have to figure out what works for you. Like I said, if you're lifting weights or something, you might be able to, eat this with no problem 30 minutes before you work out, or during your workout for that matter, right? All right. Yeah. And so this is an older article, but just know that there are plenty of articles in around, but the idea of this is to personalize your sports nutrition, personalize their carbohydrate intake. And it just takes practice. Like for these races and events, I know what I'm going to consume before. I know pretty much what I'm going to consume during. And then having a plan A, B, and C also works as well. So let's do this. I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions on that? So we covered a lot today, understanding, where carbohydrates and their role in performance, and how our goal is to conserve the liver glycogen. And we do that through sports drinks. And we got into talking at the end here about pre-exercise meal guidelines. Just make sure you're familiar with those, especially as we do quizzes and tests and things. And then also these guidelines when we get into some of the case studies. So in this chapter, there's a case study that's due next Sunday, I guess. Around there's a couple of different case studies. There's 2 in 1 in this assignment, and so these pre-exercise guidelines will be helpful for that too. But we'll talk more about that next time. We'll come back on Tuesday and we'll talk about carbohydrates during exercise, because this is a biggie. All right, everybody good? Give me a thumbs up. Talk to me. How you feeling about it? Okay, good deal. All right, y'all, we'll call it for today. I'll put this in the trainings, and you can go back and rewatch if you need to. All right, thumbs up. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.